Hi and welcome back to my channel. I'm Simon and today I'm back to have a chat with you about my 5-star reads of the year so far. And there's a few reasons that I wanted to do this. One, it's always nice to share books that you really love. I know I did a best books of the year so far back at the beginning of July. However, I also kind of want to mention books that I really love more than once, or indeed just like some books in general more than once. So I'm kind of thinking of different ways that I can do that. And I have been looking back at what has been a 5-star read for me because recently, and this sounds like such a first world problem to have, but I have been having a real run of like 4 stars, which is lovely, but nothing, a couple of 4.5s, I won't lie, which we'll possibly talk about at the end, but it's mainly been 4 stars and like I'm itching to get another 5-star in the bag. I didn't think I'd read any 5-star books in July actually, but one has grown on me, and that's also a book I particularly want to talk about more. So lots of those thoughts have been going on. Plus, I was wondering, with me having talked about wanting to make some videos around the reader that I have been, the reader that I am, and the direction that maybe I want my reading to go, I thought it'd be really interesting to see if any of these books have anything specific in common, or even better, if you can spot if any of these books have anything specific in common that is just kind of clearly something that does it for me. I mean, quite often, as we'll discuss, I'm sure, 5-star books are a bit of a surprise for me. But yeah, so what I'm going to do is go through them in order that I read them this year. And then, yeah, I'm going to try and elevator pitch them because I want to get better at that. But also, yeah, just natter and chatter with you about books, which is what this channel is all about. So the first of my 5-star reads of 2025 was also my first read of the year, and that was Robbie Arnott's Dusk. I have banged on about this all year. I feel like this book doesn't really need me chatting about it again, but I just can't not. And what's been so lovely is since this has come out in the UK and America, I've had so many messages of lots of you lovely lot here and on Instagram about how much you enjoyed it, which has thrilled me. So for those of you who haven't read it yet, this is a book about twins who are, well, below the breadline. They're trying to survive in this kind of altered Tasmania, and so they hear about a bounty on the head of a puma called Dusk who is killing shepherds, and so they decide they're going to try and capture her, and we follow them on this adventure. And what I love about this book is, one, it's an adventure, like I said. 2, I love the atmosphere and the sort of building, well, tension, let's put it like that. 3, it's kind of gothic in its sensibilities. 4, it's kind of not like anything else I've read before. And 5, the writing is just stunning. I'm not going to come up with 5 reasons why all of these are 5-star books, but that could have been something I challenged myself to do. Maybe I will do, I don't know. I've just curtailed that, even though it could be quite fun. But yeah, absolutely love this for all of those reasons. And it remains my favourite book of the year. If I could give this 6 stars, I would, but they don't exist, so I haven't. So we have that. And then the second book that was a 5-star read for me this year, I also read in January. In fact, I read 3 5-star books in January, so what a good way to begin the year. And that was A Room Above a Shop by Anthony Shapland. And this is set in rural Wales in the 80s, where we meet 2 men who signal to each other that they're both gay and are very, well, they're both very closeted because Wales at that time was not, well, the world at that time wasn't particularly kind to queer people. Not well headed, but let's not talk about that. Let's not make this gloomy and doomy. And it's how they have this sort of secret affair and what follows on from there. I loved this because it was sparse, every word counts. It was heartbreaking, what's also heartwarming, and just a really powerful emotional wallop. I'm also very excited because I'm going to be starting some reading retreats. One is in November, I'll link it down below, and Anthony Shapland is going to be at said retreat. So if you want to come along to that, there's your little sneaky warning, because we haven't announced it properly yet. Anyway, yeah, I just thought this was absolutely incredible, and this was a real surprise to me, whereas I guess with Robbie's book, well, yeah, it would have been a book that I would have predicted was going to be a 5-star read for me, because I love his writing so much, and this is my 4th of his, and I think possibly my favourite. Whereas I hadn't read anything before by Anthony. This is his debut, and so had just heard some mutterings and murmurings and bubblings that it was going to be a banger, and it was indeed very much one. Now, the third book that was a 5-star read for me this year, and I also read in January, I shouldn't be surprised was a 5-star read for me, because I guess, particularly if you look at what I was reading when I was blogging more before YouTube, well, there was podcasting betwixt the two, but I've always been a massive fan of Gothic fiction. I love me a Victorian sensation novel. Wilkie Collins, one of my absolute favourite authors, haven't read him for ages. Rebecca, epic Gothic. I haven't read a Daphne du Maurier actually for ages, so maybe I need to do those two things. And I had loved most of the books I'd read by this author previously. It's Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, and so many people have told me over the years that I would love this, but also quite a few people have told me the twists, or hinted at them quite heavily whenever I've said that I'm going to read the book. So I've kept off reading it. Plus, I think I only have one more Sarah Waters book to go, and that's Tipping the Velvet, and I don't think we're going to get a new novel for a little while. So it's kind of staggering certain books. I guess that's why I do that with Daphne du Maurier and Wilkie Collins, because they're both dead, so we're not going to get anything new anytime soon. Anyway, I said I was keeping this light, and I'm not. This is set in London in the 1860s, so perfect for that sort of sensational Gothic Victorian period that I just love. I think it is my favourite. It's tossed up between that and the Tudors for my favourite period in history. Anyway, we meet Sue, who is living in London, and she's being brought up with tricksters and people who are trying to survive but kind of do it in quite naughty, devious ways. And she is sent on a job to, well, trick someone in a big old house. I was going to say crumbling house, but it isn't quite crumbling, but it's one of those deliciously Gothic old houses that also absolute Simon catnip in fiction and just in real life. If you say to me, Simon, let's go off and see a Gothic old house today, I'd be like, yep, let's just do it. So all of that is very me, and I won't say any more from there because it gets twistier and twistier, and I just thought that was amazing. And I do love me a twist. Now, that also makes some of these books, because a lot of them have twists in, so that's a common thread apparently, really hard to talk about, but also makes it short to talk about, so that's not a bad thing. But yeah, I just thought the writing in this was absolutely wonderful. I was so lost in that Gothic Victorian world, and oh yeah, I just absolutely adored this. And it has made me really tempted to head to Tipping the Velvet, but also, like I said, there might be a bit of a wait, so I feel like I need something for in between. But yeah, this is an absolute cool because it reminded me that I should go back to the original source material of sensation novels that I haven't headed to for a while, because they are kind of my thing. And with autumn and indeed winter on their way, what a perfect time to read those. So we have that. Fourth, there were no 5-star reads in February. Shock, horror. I don't know why that is. I haven't looked back at February properly, but I was a bit like, I wasn't like devastated, but I wasn't really surprised either. I was like, oh, right, okay. February is a bit of a humdinger of a month, isn't it? So I guess I kind of put it down to that. But in March, I read my fourth 5-star book of the year, and that was Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. Now, I didn't technically include this in my books of the year so far video, even though I think I mentioned it as an honorable mention, so therefore I sort of technically did. But this is the sort of culmination, but I also think it's a brilliant diving off board of the Lucy Barton, Olive Kittredge and Bob Burgess books that are all set around the same sort of place in Maine and feature characters that have interlinked in each other's lives, even though Olive and Lucy haven't met until this point. I have loved the Lucy Barton books so much. I think the writing is so wonderful. Lucy is such a real character. Well, she's such a real person to me. And this one, with the culmination of, well, I was going to say the combination of Bob and Olive. I haven't read their stories before, and now I'm super duper keen to go back and read them, hence why I'm saying it's a really good diving off board book for me and possibly for lots of you. But the culmination of their relationships, I guess, and the way this looks at friendship and the stories that we tell each other, and just, I love, I guess what is real savage catnip for me with a book like this is that it's looking at how extraordinary ordinary things can be, and I really, really love that, and I love that in this. There's also a crime going on in the background, and I have realised that I do love me a American rural crimey kind of book, but I wouldn't say that this is one of those. It just happens that there's a crime going on in the background. But yeah, that is something else that I'm discovering that I'm loving, that I thought I'd mention, because none of those actually made it as 5-star reads this year, even though I think I've read 3 or 4 of those. But yeah, I really, really, really love this, and I do think it is a good diving off or jumping off or whatever you want to say point to go into that world, just as much as it is a really fantastic culmination, he says, not having read all of the others. But yeah, anyway, moving on, because I probably talked about that for too long. My 5th 5-star book of the year was in April, and April was another good month. I had 3 5-star books, the first of which was After You've Gone by Maggie O'Farrell, which is another book that I can't tell you too much about because it goes off in really unexpected directions. I wouldn't say it's twisty, but it kind of, I suppose it is. But we meet Alice, who one day decides to get the train from London to Edinburgh to go and see her sisters. And when she gets to the station, she sees something in the mirror that is so shocking and haunting. Sorry, Biscuit's just come to say hello. He's not been on the channel for a while. Happy Bickle. Anyway, she sees something so shocking and disturbing in the mirror that she leaves Edinburgh. She gets on a train back to London, and when she gets to London, she's so preoccupied, she falls in front of a car and ends up in a coma. And while she's in a coma, we get the narrative of her past and a relationship she was in. We also get to hear other people's perceptions of her past when they visit her, as well as getting to know some of their secrets as part of the family, and so some of the family secrets. It's done so brilliantly. Admittedly, I'm a massive Margaret O'Farrell? No. I'm a massive Maggie O'Farrell fan. This is her debut. I think this is some of her most incredible, stupendous, wonderful writing that, yeah, this just absolutely bowled me over. It's also quite naughty in parts, and I do like me a naughty book. So we have that one. Then the 6th 5-star book of the year, but the second that I read, I'm going to over confuse myself with this so much, in April, was Harriet Tubman live in concert by Bob the Drag Queen. And this was, again, like I said with Anthony Shapland, a book that I'd heard great things about, but boy oh boy, did this just go way beyond my expectations, and I just thought it was utterly fantastic. This is kind of a speculative novel, and I hadn't thought about that until the other day when I was sorting out my books of the year so far up until August, because I do that monthly over on Patreon, which is linked below if you want to join the fun over there. That when other speculative books that I read hadn't quite made my top 12 as it is now, that this was one, and it's set sort of now-ish, but imagines a world where people from history who have died just come back. And one such person is Harriet Tubman, who is a big part of the Underground Railroad, and she wants to make an album and indeed a concert about her experiences. And she takes on this producer who is a black queer man living in America, and through their 2 stories we get this sort of look at America then, now, and all of that. And it's so wonderfully done. It's really funny. It's quite heartbreaking. It's really unexpected. The writing's phenomenal, and I love the way it asks some big questions, but in a very subtle way. You go along for the ride, but your thoughts are being provoked as you go, and I think that is genius. That's something that I clearly really love. Then the last 5-star of April, I think this was the 7th one that we're on, was Stag Dance by Tori Peters. And it's rare that a short story collection or an anthology isn't quite, it's anthology only when it's works by different authors, but this is basically a group of novellas, and each one has a different genre. So you have romance, you have a western, you have dystopic, you have horror, and did I say romance? Yeah. And I loved that this book did that. I loved that it played with those tropes. I love the way it looks at gender and sexuality and the fluidity of both, and how much that doesn't matter and how much it sort of does matter at the same time. I will be thinking about the Lumberjacks for quite some time, but so will I, for those of you who read it, the pigs. I mean, there's a lot of things around pigs in here. Also, the sexiness in this book is incredible, and just the way that Tori is so, well, her writing is so diverse in terms of not just the genre, but in terms of, how do I put it? I just think she can write in all sorts of different ways, really diversely, really incredibly, and this for me was just an absolute belter. And like I said, it's rare that you get a collection like that where every single one is a banger. I would say Stag, the title story from this, is like a 6-star read. So yeah, but that shows how good that whole selection, a selection of works within one. Let's not try and give it a whole new label. Let's just not. Now, interestingly, my only 5-star book, yes, that's what we are talking about, well done Simon, but my only 5-star book in May was my first 5-star non-fiction of the year. And it's rare that I read non-fiction books that are 5 stars, but there's another one coming. Now, I did mention this, I think, as an honorary mention in my best books of the year so far, but I'm going to mention it again. This is Neneh Cherry's, 1,000 Threads. This is her memoir, and I was really intrigued for this before I started it because I'm a big fan of Neneh's music, and I've heard amazing things about her through Andy Oliver, who's one of her close friends who I've had the pleasure of working with and just adore. And so yeah, very, very excited for it. It absolutely blew me away. The writing is so vibrant and it's such great storytelling, and you just get completely absorbed in Neneh's, well, I was going to say world, but it feels like she's lived in so many different conditions with so many different people that it's kind of worlds. And this book looks at the whole spectrum of life: love, grief, happiness, sadness, heartbreak, hope. And also just so many big societal discussions, topics are in this book. It looks at class, it looks at race, it looks at creativity, it looks at art. I just thought it was utterly, utterly wonderful. And yeah, I think it is definitely for me the writing and the way it just looked at so many poignant moments in someone's life and did it in this sort of, it's kind of conversational, a little bit conspiratorial. It's like sitting with someone and they're just telling you everything over like a cup of tea or a cocktail, but in this really beautiful, often quite haunting way. Yeah, absolutely loved it. Now, my second 5-star non-fiction book of the year shouldn't really be a surprise. Well, it might be actually to lots of you, because I haven't talked about this author on the channel, I don't think, because I haven't read one of their books for ages, and sadly they passed away this year, but they are one of my faves. If it hadn't been for this author and some of their books when I was in my late teens trying to work out my sexuality and all that kind of stuff, could have been a very different state of affairs. But the author is Edmund White, and this is The Loves of My Life, and I should say a sex memoir. And as I mentioned with Neneh's book, this is a very conversational, it is conspiratorial, and I mean that in the best way. Like, you know, when you're with a really good mate and you're telling each other absolutely everything, and that's very much the case with Neneh and her life. With Edmund, this is much more, as you may have guessed from the subtitle, a sex memoir, about the more salacious side of his life, but does it in this way that is both titillating and verges on voyeuristic, but like not in an icky way, in a, yeah, titillating way, is so frank and, pun slightly intended, no holes barred, but it's so naughty and it's so full of joy and life, but also the political act of sex I hadn't really thought about, and how sex can be, Well, it looks at how sex is, it can be a career for some people. It looks at how it can define some people's lives. It looks at how a life without sex, and just there's a whole myriad of thoughts on sex. How many times can I say sex in a video? I think this is the most ever. Let's throw in some more sex. But yeah, I just thought it's a giddy book, and one that I also found kind of poignant in the way it looked at getting older and the way it looked at not being a stereotypical gay man, and also just the honest discussion around sex work. I thought that was wonderfully done. Yeah, I just thought this was absolutely fab, and felt like I just sat and had dinner opposite a friend who was telling me their absolute naughtiest, juiciest tales over, I was going to say a 3-course meal, but actually it would be longer than that, because boy oh boy, there are a whole host of stories in here. So yeah, loved it. Now, when I think about why a book might be a 5-star book for me, this next book, well, there's 2 reasons why I thought it would have been, or would have predicted it would be a 5-star read before I started it. One was that I have loved the author's 2 previous books. Now, I've said before, and I'll say it again, it takes an author 3 books for them to become an absolute favourite of mine. There's got to be 3 absolute hits. There can be some duds along the way, or some lesser favourites, should we say, but 3 absolute bangers. This is this author's 3rd absolute banger, and also it's a fairy tale retelling, and I do love, and have loved since I was very, very little, fairy tales. And I mean, I called my pet duck Rapunzel. It was one of my first ducks, so there we go. This is Blackwoods Blue Sky by Eowyn Ivy, which was my first 5-star read. No, it wasn't. It's my 2nd of June. That was my first. There were 3 in June. It was another banging month. And this, now, do I want to tell you which fairy tale it retells? Because it will sort of give too much away potentially, but it's set in Alaska, and we meet Birdie, who is a single mum. She is struggling, she's making some questionable choices, but you know that she really, really loves her daughter and wants the best for them and their future. And it's how she interacts with Arthur, who is an outsider, quite literally, to the village. He lives on a hill over the river, and we follow that situationship initially, shall we say, and it takes some very surprising turns. There are lots of surprises here. Also, this book hit me, over the head with such an emotional wallop. I just was not expecting that. I just bawled like an absolute baby. It really, really, really made me cry. And I thought what this book did, and looked at the complexities of, no, I can't say that because that gives too much away. It's just a wonderful, wonderful book, and I love the way that Eowyn writes about Alaska. Again, like I mentioned with Dusk, this is a book where the sense of place and the atmosphere of that place is so rich and vivid and quite gothic and quite unsettling. Nature's a really big part of this book, as it is with Dusk actually, and a few of the other books. So nature's obviously something that I really, really love in a book, or a common theme in 5 stars. But yeah, I just thought this was wonderful. Hence why it was a 5-star. There's like a daft thing to say. Now, the penultimate 5-star book of the year so far, and the last 5-star book that I read in June, was The Book of Guilt by Catherine Chidgey. And this was such a delightful surprise, because the last book I read of Catherine Chidgey's was Remote Sympathy, when it was up for the Women's Prize, and I didn't really get on with it. Now, I have to say, sorry for sniffing, I have to say that I think with that book it was more the subject matter. It's set during World War II, and I studied that so much at school. Like I don't tend to head to World War books at all, and so I think that might have been the problem. I think also it was a really big book, and I was trying to read it by a tight deadline, because whenever I read the Women's Prize long list, there's obviously, I mean, this year was an exception, but I don't want to keep dwelling on that. But it's normally quite a tight turnaround. But yeah, this year majorly tight turnaround, so there's a bit of that. But I would like to head back to it again, because I'm now determined to read everything that Catherine Chidgey has read. This is set in an alternate 1970s England, and we are looking at the after effects or residuals stuff from World War II. We are out in the countryside, where we are in an old, big, crumbling building, which, as I mentioned, I really, really love. And we meet triplets who are looked after by Mother Morning, Mother Afternoon and Mother Night. And we know something's not quite right here. We also flip to another storyline of Nancy, who's living in the suburbs with her parents. And again, slowly but surely things seem to be, quite apparent that things are not quite right. And I just loved the pacing of this. I loved the building tension of this. I loved the alternateness of this. I can't quite decide whether that makes it as, what's the word that I use for what I'm really, really enjoying this year? Oh my Lord, I want to say suspense, and that isn't right. Not a dystopic one. I've literally used the word like 20 minutes ago. Anyway, speculative. I love the fact that it had both of those elements in it, even though it was set in the past. I really, really love that. And just the way that she writes characters and the way she writes sort of set pieces within the story that are just so, oh yeah, I just loved it. And think about it often and cannot wait to read Pet and Axman's Carnival, I think it's the other one I have. So yes, this was an absolutely delightful surprise and can't recommend it enough. And then the last 5-star book that I've read so far this year was originally a 4.5, but also slightly inspired this video because I talked about this in my July wrap up and I felt like I didn't do this book justice, and it's a book that I want to keep talking about and want to keep shouting about, and I feel like that with all of these books. So any ideas for how I can do that more with books over the rest of the year, I would love to know in the comments down below. But the book is Coleman Hill by Kim Coleman Foote, and this is described by the author as a biomythography. I think that's the right term, yes, which is a term that Audre Lorde, who I've never read and really, really should, came up with. And what Kim Coleman Foote has done is, through the stories of her family going back in time, she creates this mythologized, biomythologized, she creates this sort of family mythology, and it's about two initially friends and their families who at one point become joined, and that's actually where the fractures really start. But she takes all of these pictures that are intertwined in the text from family gatherings in the past, or pictures that she's found in kind of this old house that kind of had this archive of all the family history, plus from talking to her relatives about certain characters, and just builds this incredible story of two women who moved with the Great Migration, were friends, like I said, their families combined, and then everything fractured, and you get some really incredible portraits of these, particularly women. It is very much a book that centers on these women in one family, and I just loved it. It also introduced me to some parts of history that I had no idea about. I didn't know about the some of the whorehouses in some of the big cities that were actually all lesbian women who were having sex for money with men. And so I found that already fascinating. I didn't know much about the Great Migration. This made me want to go and read loads more. This is kind of one of those books that I describe, I don't really like using the name of this company, but it's a Googleable book, where a Googleable book. It makes you want to go and Google loads about what you've learned about in a book through fiction. Oh, I just loved it, and can't recommend it enough. Sadly, it isn't out in the UK. I really wanted to find a publisher in the UK because I just love it. I really want an imprint. I won't lie, I'm putting it out there. I'm trying to work on affirmations and manifestations, but I think, yeah, there are some books that come out in other countries that deserve to be really, really shouted about here. And that's something that I think I want to do with the channel going forward, but that's a whole different thing with the channel. But yeah, I just thought this was absolutely fab. Can't recommend it enough. And initially, I will say it was a 4.5, but I've not stopped thinking about these characters, particularly Bertha. Bertha became a favourite, and I kind of would like a whole book on her. And that's how I felt about a lot of the characters, which makes it sound like I felt like the book wasn't long enough or I didn't get enough. No. The characters are all wonderful and tantalising, but so tantalising I would have I would happily read a novel on each one. Now, August has been and gone. We are now in September, and I haven't done my reading wrap up yet. I'm planning on putting that live on Sunday. I'm hoping to film it on Friday. And I have two books that are on the cusp, I love the word cusp, on the cusp of being 5 stars, so I thought I would mention them and why possibly they're not quite there yet. With the first one, I'm finding it harder to put my finger on the reason, because I think the more I think about it, the more I think about it, it will be a 5 star, and that is The Hounding by Zenobi Purvis. This is based on a true historical incident where in the 18th century, in one summer in Oxfordshire, some weird things happened, but there were also a group of sisters who people believed were turning into dogs. And Zenobi Purvis writes about that and some of the weird things that happened. And I was just like spellbound by this book. And I have to say, going back to the first 5-star review, which is why I think this is a 5-star read for me, actually, now that we've thought about it a little more, even though I've been thinking about it quite a bit before filming this. But Dusk's ending, no spoilers from me, please don't spoil the ending in the comments down below, but if you thought it was an incredible ending, do say wow, that ending. But was so brilliant and so perfect, and this has the perfect ending for me personally. I just thought it was such a satisfying, almost like tingle inducing delight. I used to talk about book tingles and what books used to give me the tingle at the beginning quite often. I haven't talked about a book that finishes me off with a tingle. Let's not go there, move on. But yeah, this was that book, an absolutely fantastic historical fiction. And on that note, I'm really surprised A Little Trickery by Rosanna Pike wasn't a 5-star book for me, but that was a 4.5. Anyway, yes, this I'll be talking about more when I do my reading wrap up, but yes, I think this is a 5-star for me. And I feel like this next book could head that way. There is a reason why it got a 4.5 though, although it was going to be 4.75, but I don't like the whole 4.25 or the 4.75 or the 3.25. Anyway, I could go on, I won't. But The Slip, which is a short story collection by Merriam Webster, which is out from a new independent publisher in Australia called Anaco. This, oh my goodness. When I was reading this collection, it was making me think of my favourite short story writer and the author of some of my favourite short story collections, Caris Davis, but naughtier. And there is a lot of interrogation and discussion of sex in here, which I found really thought-provoking, again a little bit titillating, but never voyeuristic in an ick way. Clearly that's something that I like. I clearly like books that are quite naughty and possibly a little bit filthy, but without them being voyeuristic or icky. I like to be titillated whilst being thought-provoked. Take from that what you will. But yeah, the reason, going back to the book and not going off about all that, the reason this book for me didn't quite get 5 stars is there was one short story, and only one out of all of them, that I didn't quite get. However, thinking about it in hindsight, I have thought about that short story quite a lot, which is a story about writing a book whilst also talking about the history of eels, and it all interweaves in really interesting, odd ways, which at first I found a bit like, oh, I'm not so sure about this, but having thought about it ever since, I think it's really, really, really wonderfully done. I just didn't always get it. But that's me, not the book, and it's me, not the writing, because the writing in that is brilliant. So yeah, this is very much on the cusp. We'll see what I decide. Also, I don't tend to talk about, and that's also why I decided to do a 5-star video as well. I don't tend to talk about star ratings when I do my reading wrap-ups. So yeah, so there we go. So I would love to know in the comments down below if you can see any themes within that. I think gothic, I think titillating but not voyeuristically icky has come up. Nature, surprise, atmosphere, gothic. Do I say gothic more than once there? Possibly. But yeah, and the other thing I would really love to know is if I'm going to do a video, or indeed I think it could probably be a series of videos around the reader that I have been in the past, I am currently in the direction that I might want to go. How would you like those videos to be? Because I'm struggling a little bit to work out the format of them. So any suggestions for that, please let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know based on that selection of books, if there's any books that you think would be absolute 5-star reads for me. I might have read them, so you might be bang on. I might not have read them, so I might want to get my mitts on them, and that's never a bad thing. But yeah, I'd love to know all of those things in the comments down below. I will be back with another video very soon. I hope you're all doing something, I hope you're doing super well. I mean, I hope you're doing something lovely. You're watching this possibly, I don't know how lovely that is or not, but I also hope you're reading something lovely, things are lovely, and yeah, let's keep the conversation going on in the comments down below. And if you want any more savage shenanigans in the interim, then my Patreon, my Patreon, my Blue Sky, I'm not doing this video, and my Instagram. I prefer to do Instagram, Blue Sky, Patreon, my wishlist, and all those things are linked down below, as is the link to that reading retreat, the first of hopefully what's going to be a quarterly series, fingers crossed. And yeah, also let me know what your latest 5-star read was, even if they align with my taste or not, and why it was a 5-star read for you, and what makes a 5-star read for you. Wow, all the things that I want you to chat about in the comments below, where we can keep chatting. But until then, and until the next one, bye.